Hi everyone! So I'm back today with an exciting thrift flip. I'm going to be turning a vintage quilt that I found into a quilted jacket. It's the first time I've ever used this pattern, so it's kind of more vlog than tutorial, but I do go over all the steps, so this could be useful if you're planning a similar project. So here's the quilt, which was an absolute bargain. I got it for £5 off of Vinted. It has these green and white checks with little flowers, and then it has these shamrocks embroidered in the middle. It was completely handmade and even has this little label in it, which is handwritten by Betty, who made the quilt in 1987. So I spent ages trying to decide which pattern to use for this, because there are just loads of nice ones and they're all like slightly different. And then I couldn't decide if I wanted a collar, if I wanted gathered sleeves. Anyway, in the end, I've decided on the Rue Quilt Coat by Spaghetti Western Sewing. So I've downloaded the pattern. It's got like suggestions for using an old quilt and cute little illustrations. So yeah, I think hopefully it won't be too difficult to make. So I've just printed out the pattern on A4 paper, and now I need to do the really boring part of cutting it all out and sticking it all together.
Where did the time go? How do we move so far away? Holding on, how much can we both take when love is in echo? I can't hear what you're saying when love is in echo. I can't hear what you're saying.
So I've printed and assembled the pattern, and now I've laid out the quilt and I'm gonna cut it out. But yeah, this is kind of like the fun but stressful bit when you're using a vintage quilt, because obviously you can play around with the placement of the details on the quilt and where they're gonna fall on the pattern. So yeah, you just have to experiment and lay out all the pieces and try and see what you think will look good. So let's do that now. So the sleeve is another thing I'm quite undecided on at the minute. I was just thinking, should I use this green strip and maybe have it at the end of the sleeve like this? So the sleeve will have a little green band around it, which could be quite nice. And then the top would have like half of a clover on it. Would that look weird? I've seen a lot of these on Instagram that people have made, and a lot of them have folded the sleeve up quite a lot. So I think even if it has this like random clover bit at the end, I can just fold it up and then it'll be like a nice green sleeve bit on the wrist, which will go with the top of the arm, which is also green. Hopefully that works. We'll see. I cut the pocket piece out of tracing paper so that I could see exactly what the pattern would be underneath, because I wanted to line the squares up perfectly, as you can see here. This is going to have binding all around it. I still need to decide which colour to do the binding in. I was playing around with this purpley colour, which I really like, but this is not the right size, so I would have to get something like that that actually works. I was also playing with this pink gingham, which I've used to bind something before, this waistcoat I made. Which it looks really good on that, I think, but I don't know if it's a bit too busy because there's already a lot of squares going on. So I'm thinking maybe just like a plain pink or a plain purple. So what I'm about to do is bind the pockets. I've chosen to do the pockets where you do the bias binding the whole way around. There is an option to just, there's like another pocket piece you could choose where you just bind the top, I think. So I'm going to do the all-round one. This is my binding. I've bought pre-made binding. I did have a look in my stash to see if I could find any fabrics that I could make it out of, but I couldn't really find anything, so I would have had to buy fabric anyway and then make all the binding. So I've just bought some pre-made. This, it's called double fold binding, 1/2 inch, so it's folded twice and then folded again. So yeah, I'm not going to be doing the step of making my own binding, but there's lots of videos on that if you want to do that. To attach the binding, I'm clipping it to the wrong side of the pocket, like this. So where the two ends meet, I'm leaving like an extra 1/2 inch, and then I'm just pushing them both down to the right, and then I'll clip them both going that way. So then I'll just sew over both of them like that. Sew that down just inside that first crease line. Once that binding is sewn on, I'm basically folding it over to the right side so that it just covers that stitch line I just made. And then I'm clipping that down. So I've got that all pinned down now, just over the first stitch line. And then I'm going to top stitch from this side, just on the edge of the pink bit. So I've pinned the jacket together with one sleeve because it was a lot of effort. And then I've pinned the pocket on so I can sort of check the placement, which I think is good. So I just top stitched around this pocket and I was like, yeah, that looks so good and neat. And then I realised I've not left any opening to use it as a pocket. So I'm gonna have to unpick at least this bit, and hopefully that doesn't look too messy. Sometimes you just do things that are so dumb. Anyway, we all make mistakes. Let's try and fix that. Right, the next step is to add bias binding to the two front pieces. So it starts like at the neckline and goes all the way down to the side. And the pattern says to start 1/2 inch away from this little notch. The seam allowance down slightly at the corners so that there's less bulk when I fold it over. All my emotions are painted I've got all the binding finished on the 2 front pieces, and now it's time to bind the back piece. This time we start from that like underarm seam and then just go all the way down the bottom to the other arm. It's finally time to start actually assembling the jacket, so I'm pinning the shoulder seams and just sewing those together. Then that seam is finished with bias binding, of course. So I'm onto the sleeves. I've got my jacket laid out flat like this, and I just have to pin the arm to the open armhole, matching up the notches. So let's do that now. So I've attached both sleeves. You can kind of see. Now we have to finish that inside seam again with bias binding. So I've pinned the binding on that seam, just like with the other seams. Now I need to sew this on and then fold it over and then top stitch. This was probably the most difficult bit to sew because it was quite bulky and there was just a lot of fabric that you have to try and maneuver. So this was a difficult part. So I've just finished attaching all of the sleeve binding, which looks fine from a distance. It's really not that neat because I always just find the stitching is slightly off, like it doesn't cover it properly, like this. But I don't care that much because it's just on the inside, and this is just for me. It's now time to sew up the sides of the jacket, which is exciting because then it will start to look like an actual jacket. So I've pinned the sleeves and the sides together, and I'm just going to go and sew those up. The next step, you guessed it, is bias binding. So I'm pinning that binding all the way down to where it meets the other binding, and then folding it over 1/2 inch like that, and then just clipping that down. This part was not fun. I was sewing through a lot of thick fabric and my needle broke so hard and it really made me jump. So yeah, I had to sort that out, find a new needle and start this again. Okay, I think we're on to the final bit of bias binding. Thank the Lord. This is the sleeve, so it's just a little bit of binding and I'm doing it in the exact same way. Sort of overlap the 2 edges together and then just put them down so they're both going in one direction and then clipping them in place. So for the collar, I've cut out one piece of the quilt, just the back, which is green. So I thought it'd be nice to just have the solid green collar. And then for the under collar, I've cut out a piece of pink gingham. So I don't think you'll be able to see that loads, but I just think that'll be like a cute little hint of pink gingham underneath the collar. It's kind of confusing in the pattern. It says like you can't use your pre-made quilt to make the collar. You have to make a new one out of like your binding fabric. But I don't really understand why, because you just make a quilted layer anyway. So I'm going to try this. I think it will work fine. We will see. I basically have to just sew these 2 together, leaving the bottom open and then turn it inside out. So I've finished making the collar. I've top stitched around the edge to make it look nice and neat. And here's the little gingham undercollar. So now I just need to try and attach it, which I'm kind of scared about because a few people have told me that they struggled with this part of the pattern. So I don't know how easy it's going to be, but let's give it a try. So you attach this with the top collar facing the inside of the coat, which feels kind of confusing, but that is right.
I don't know if I'm the one you want. Should I go, or should I leave this on? Because lately I've been getting this feeling that you might like me too. And just maybe I could take a little risk for you. Make my move.
I've sewn that down, which kind of went okay, but I just don't really understand these edge pieces of the collar. It doesn't seem to work. You're meant to just be able to tuck everything inside that under collar and then sew it down, but there's like not room. So I decided to just unpick some of these stitches on this piece of under collar. So yeah, if you unpick those stitches a little bit, then this binding and this bit of the outer collar will go up into that collar, and then you can sew that down like that. Please let me know if you know how that's meant to work and if I did it wrong or how I should have done it, because it doesn't feel right. Here I'm just pinning the under collar so it covers the seam, and then I'm top stitching along that edge. Okay, the collar is on. I think it looks okay. It's just, so I don't know. I honestly don't know how this was meant to go on, because it didn't mention anything about like this specific end bit, but I think it looks okay. But I'm worried that it's not that secure, so I'm going to do another stitch just down like that. Okay, it's so nearly finished. I think the collar looks pretty good. The only thing left, well, I've got to attach my label, which I've put in place, and then I've got to do the snaps down the front. You can do ties or snaps. She does recommend to at least put one snap at the top so that it helps the collar to sit right. I'm using these brass ones, which I think go quite well. So I've tried it on and marked where I think the top one should go. And then I'm just gonna see how many I think I want, and then I'll measure them properly to make sure they're like equally spaced. You basically just have to hammer these snaps into place. I got my boyfriend to help me.
Oh yeah, that's mash up.
Finally, this jacket is finished. It feels like this took me forever. I think it was probably all the bias binding, to be honest. I do not want to see any bias binding for a while. Anyway, I think it turned out adorable. I'm really proud of it. It's kind of quirky and it's a bit in your face, but I think it's really cool. Hopefully I did the quilt justice, because I know it's slightly controversial, cutting up vintage handmade quilts, but I think I'm gonna love this forever. So I also kept in Betty's little label just inside the pocket. Thank you so much for watching this video. Feel free to subscribe and go follow me on Instagram, because I post a lot of my projects on there.